what's going on with the cyber attacks slash hacking slash whatever over at MGM. What's not being talked about that much is Caesars, but that situation has not gone away. I'm going to ask an industry expert who happens to be my best friend certain questions, and it'll be relevant. You'll want to hear it. We're not going to really do a Q&A, so just pay attention. And at the end, we're going to discuss what you guys can do to mitigate it and whether it or not it's a good time to even come to Vegas at this point, because this thing is unfolding. MGM is actually sending out tweets, or X's as they're called now, saying, don't worry, everything's fine. Yeah, okay, MGM. This is not insider information. This is knowledge on perhaps what happened, what took place, who might have done it, and how and when and why and where it was actually done. So there's a lot of speculation, but my friends and I have been prognosticating on the situation, taking deep dives into what the hackers have said so far. And we're going to discuss that based on the information at hand. So is everyone ready? You ready to bop on over there? So let's do it. There is information that is the hacking group is rather bold, and they're rather vocal, and they are sending information and making it public. So I want to go over that first, but first I want to bring on my guest. Everyone say hello to Steve. I'm going to start out by showing this real quick. This is something that was put out by the hackers, so we'll just go over this real briefly. You can go check this out for yourself. This is Malwarebytes. They do have free antivirus if you're interested in things like that, but it's a good blog and resource to find out, and they've been talking about this a lot. So this ransomware group steps up, and let me pop myself in the corner there. They step up and they issue statements about the compromise. They had a few interesting things to say about what they thought about the MGM security, their personnel, things like that. And they went so far as to describe how they did it, what they did. The statement is quite long, yada, yada, yada. We're not going to read the entire thing. But they claim, this is the hacking group speaking, we have made multiple attempts to reach out to MGM International. MGM, as reported, MGM shut down computers inside their network as a response to us, being the hackers. We intend to set the record straight. Wow, what does it take for a hacking group to want to set the record straight? I mean, it sounds like they're slightly butthurt by the misinformation that's coming out. No ransomware was deployed prior to the initial takedown of their infrastructure by their internal teams. MGM made the hasty decision to shut down each and every one of their Okta sync servers after learning that we've been lurking around in their Okta agent servers, sniffing passwords of people whose passwords couldn't be cracked from the domain. On and on and on. I'll leave that to Steve to explain what's going on. Publicly accessible .okta subdomain. Bad idea, as we'll discuss, extraordinarily bad idea if that was actually the case. And it goes on to say what they did, how they're going to do it. The rumors about teenagers, because currently they're saying that this supposed hacking group is a bunch of 17 to 22-year-olds, spanking a monkey in their mom's basement and whatnot, who pulled this off. I don't believe that to be the case, but the rumors about the teenagers from the US and the UK breaking into this organizations are still just that, rumors. We are waiting for, and yada, yada, yada. The ransomware group will discuss whether it indeed was ransomware. So you can read this article for yourself. I'll post a link in the description afterwards. While I got you, don't forget to check out your FUF1. There's a link in the description for that. FUF1 t-shirts. Show your displeasure the way I do too. And I ordered one for myself. And this is, you can find this on Bleeping Computer as well. How to avoid, of course they're going to get their licks in and tell you how to avoid all this. So I have some questions for Steve, and we're going to get into them. That's a stock image from Adobe. I've used that same damn one. Bastards. Maybe it's my image. All right, so let's get out of there. Come back over here. How you doing, Steve?
I'm good. I feel like I've got some studio envy here. I need the cool background. I've only got...
Yeah, I'll get you some LEDs. I'll send them over for your birthday coming up.
There you go.
All right.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. And thank you for coming on board. Most appreciated. We've taken very deep dives. We'll take a medium deep dive. I don't know how much of this is in the scope of the viewers, but I am interested to get this information out. So, first question I have for you, Steve, is what kind of attack is it? I've made several jokes about them getting a free version of AVG and running it on all their computers and whatnot. We both know that I was joking about that, and I hope the viewers know too. Was it a virus? Was it a worm? Was it ransomware? Was it social engineering? How and why and when and where do you think this attack transpired? What kind of attack?
Yeah, so I think it's at the single sign-on, and I'll tell you exactly why and what that means in layman's terms. But if we go back to the article first for a minute, there's a couple keys that come out when you assess it. The author, if that is legit from the hackers, and that's always a question. And first of all, this is a purely speculation discussion. We don't know how much of this is truth, how much is not. We have every reason to believe it is true, but at the same time, purely speculation. I'm sure, Bror, you would caution your YouTube audience here for that. And so therefore, anything we propose tonight is purely speculation. As you said at the start, there's no insider information. I do not work for MGM. And if there's a conflict, I'll identify it where necessary. I do not work for any of the companies involved, or at least named in this article. First thing we notice is just the English, the use of English. The English grammar doesn't read like what we would expect with English Americans. Is that the individual in the hacker group doesn't speak English as a native language? Is it one person? Does it mean the hacker group is or isn't English or American based? It's hard to say, but it's the way certain words are. Like we still continue, it's instead of saying natural form English, there's a lot of places where punctuation is wrong. They cut off sentences, continuity within sentences. So it reads like, if you go take a finer tooth comb, it first and foremost reads that the author of this, or the people who put this out, are certainly not English. I would not characterize them as English speaking or first language. It's probably a second language. They've done a decent job, but it's always a question of that. The real key in this article is what they mention of Okta. And in particular, if you want to scroll down to where they call this out, if this is in fact true, what they're talking about is not a virus attack at all. In fact, if you scroll down a little further, I think they call it mgmresorts.okta.com, which is a bit of a surprise here, frankly. Yeah, there we go. So right out the gate, this is an identity attack. And so what we're talking about is, if, again, assuming that this is correct and this is accurate information, then security experts are going to look at this being an attack on the systems that manage the usernames and passwords. And in particular, they call out Okta, and they make mention to something else called the sync servers, which aren't really a thing, but they also call it the Active Directory agents, which are a thing. We're talking about single sign-on. So what is single sign-on? Single sign-on in a nutshell, we can flash a diagram up here in just a minute. Let's hold on that for a sec. We're talking about how employees within the MGM networks log into various systems. And those systems can be things like Microsoft 365 or Google Workspaces if they use that, how they possibly log into routers, how they log into the slot machines, fundamentally. So just to start here first, I'm going to disqualify based on this article. I don't see this as a worm or virus attack, so I'm not sure what AVG would do. And more than anything, the first thing you're thinking is, how do you compromise ATMs and slot machines at the same time? And how does that come over to the hotel? So those networks, as you've alluded to in a past stream, should be generally non-routable to each other. What that means is they're isolated, they're bubbled away, they're segmented away, they're hard partitioned away from each other. So if you get into one network, you can't just run amok into the other ones. This is called what we call in the industry isolating blast radius. So if there's something that happens, it's contained. So the first thing that triggered before this article came out was, how the heck did they get out to multiple devices and multiple systems that should be, and all intents and purposes, reasonable expectations that they're going to be in different networks. And the article explains that this is a single sign-on attack. So we're not looking at virus and we're not looking at a network attack. We're looking at an attack first and foremost on identity.
Identity. Got it. They're going after passwords. They found passwords. Ultimately, I'm sure they either promoted themselves to super users or found a super admin or super user account and started manipulating from there. Would that be accurate?
In fact, it is. In fact, I think you have a diagram. If you want to flash up the first diagram, let me kind of walk the viewers through a real easy layman's term, plain English discussion about what this is. So I know it's difficult to follow if you're not in this industry. In all fairness, Okta is a professional company. They are a multi-billion-dollar market cap. They're the largest single sign-on player in the world. We'll talk about what they do in just a minute. They're based out of San Francisco. They've been around since 2009. This is generally, you would reasonably expect that it's not going to be an issue in Okta. We'll talk about how you compromise it. So in computers today, one of the biggest problems we have is how do we successfully log in? If I log into one system, when I log into another system, am I using the same username password? Do I have to have a different password? In our consumer life, we see this all the time. If you log into ChatGPT, for example, if you log into Apple, if you log into Amazon, they're always saying, would you like to enter your email, or would you rather use your Google account or your Facebook account or sometimes your Amazon or Apple account? What we're talking about here is that's the consumer version of single sign-on, which is to say, hey, I'm going to log into multiple systems at the same time, and instead of having a different username and password for each one, I'm going to have one username, one password, and this is called single sign-on. And in the diagram on the left, we see Okta here. In a normal company, like a new company, if you're starting today, you're going to set up your single sign-on portal. You're going to set up your single sign-on instance. And in this case, I'm going to look at the bottom left. We'll call it, let's say MGM starts today. They've never had history. It's a brand new company. They're going to go out to okta.com. They're going to provision an organization or a tenant. They're going to name it. In this case, they named it mgmresorts.okta.com. They're going to enter all of their employee usernames and all their employee passwords and a great degree of their employee profile information in that system. We're talking about first name, last name, possibly manager's name, phone numbers, title, division. That is up to the corporation, MGM in this case, to determine how much of that information. But that's the source of truth for what we call the identity provider, or IDP for short. And you can see a group of people on the left. Okta here in this case is where the usernames and passwords are stored. So as a normal MGM employee, I'm going to go to mgmresorts.okta.com. I'm going to enter my username and password and potentially be prompted for some type of secondary factor of authentication, a hardware token such as this right here, or something on my phone in a lesser example. But nonetheless, I'm going to successfully authenticate in. And then I'm going to be able to, in that interface, I'm going to click on tiles and maybe go into my Microsoft 365 account for my email, my calendar, Teams, or whatever I need, my Excel, Word online. I'm going to go to Salesforce if I'm a sales rep. If I'm an engineer, I might go to Miro for diagrams, but it's all happening in one place. I'm not using a different username or password for Microsoft or Miro or Salesforce. And ostensibly in the same environment, it's quite possible that devices like routers, potentially ATMs, and you can see the slots here too. I'd be shocked if the credentials for the slots were tied to single sign-on, but it's possible. If you are a service technician and you need to log into those, it is quite possible that you're going to use the same single sign-on system. You go to the router on that rack and you log in, and they might have configured it to go back through single sign-on for authentication, or even the slot machine. I don't know how slots actually work. I think there's a badge and I'm sure it's a separate set of credentials. But in the end, what the corporate environment's going to try to do is tie as many of their systems to single sign-on. And I want to be very clear, it's not just for ease of use to get in, but it's also what we call revocation. So in the event that you HR hire somebody, you can easily put them into the single sign-on system. It's a industry standard, it's secure, it's got all the things that make it a reality. But at the same time, if there's a termination event, the employee resigns or separates from the company or is terminated on whatever reason, furlough or reduction in force, what we call RIF, then then you conversely revoke them from Okta as well.
I think a pressing question would be, actually, I have two. One I didn't write down that just popped into my mind. Maybe we'll address that first. We might be putting the cart before the horse, but while it's still on my mind, I did want to hit it up real quick. Where is the Nevada Gaming Commission in all this?
You got to think, let's step away from the tech first, and I do want to come back to that diagram, but let's address this here first. It's a great question. It's one that I asked up front, and we haven't yet addressed how they got in.
Mm-hmm.
I suspect this is clearly an airtight mission. This is a need-to-know basis. This is damage control. More than likely MGM. We're going to focus on MGM because I don't know the Caesar situation. The only thing that they've commented on publicly is MGM. More than likely MGM is doing damage control. They're in triage mode. They're more than likely trying to assess the extent of the damage. It would not surprise me if they do not have a solid handle just yet on how far and how extensive this is. And if they do, then they're probably in emergency crisis. Let's start shutting machines down, or let's start segmenting these further. Let's start getting users out of the system, and we'll talk about why in just a minute. But I suspect NGC, Nevada Gaming Commission, is in here behind the scenes. And to be honest, it would also not surprise me if the other casinos are working with MGM as well. And something that your viewers probably don't know, that we have a little more expertise on my side, is the casinos do work with each other in the security space, in physical security and in technology security. And make no mistake, if Wynn has not come out and been compromised just yet, I'm sure they are talking at least as peers in giving updates. MGM's not going to share the laundry clearly to any of these people, but I promise you these groups know each other and they're on the phone with each other. There's no question about that. But I suspect NGC, sorry, one second. I suspect Nevada Gaming Commission is probably engaged and is very much taking a hands-off approach, looking at the regulations, looking at the blast radius, looking at the risk profile, and probably in contact with MGM and not being public about it.
Right. Yeah, no statements have been made. So we'll get back to the diagram, but a pressing question would be, how did this occur, in your opinion, in your experience, and was there any, was it an inside job?
Yeah, this is the $64 million question, right?
Yep.
Nobody's talking. It's hard. Look, it's hard to say with any degree of evidence. What I'm going to say is speculatory, but it's based on 27 years of expertise in the space. When you see an attack that spans multiple systems that should cross multiple networks that have no business, I can't enter your house and you can't enter mine, right? And suddenly an attack just wipes right across multiple systems in different domains and different houses and different silos. The first thing a security person is thinking is this is an inside job, right? Does that mean there's one person to rule all of the things that can be an attack point? Generally, no. I mean, large corporations like MGM, reasonably, you should expect that they're going to design to get away from that problem. They're going to say, Bror Fredrik, you know too much. We're going to put you on X in the event that you go sideways, right? So this is called the insider threat, and it's a real big deal. The industry over the last 5, 6, 7 years has really focused on the insider threat. My gut reaction, purely gut, no evidence, is at first this was an inside job. It had inside help. And I'll show you why in the diagram. And the diagram is going to speak to what that article says. But I'm shocked. I'm shocked that they got access to so many systems across so many properties. If it's not insider threat, then it's straight up malfeasance or dereliction of duty on the technology and security team's part. That's just hands down. That's just, there's people who won't be there tomorrow. It reeks of insider, though, to be honest. It reeks. There's got to be an inside element to do what they did. And the next diagram will share that.
And if you look on, as we were speaking of earlier, if you look on mgm.careers.com, they're actually hiring IT people, with prefacing by saying, I mean, I'm sure it's not exactly what they need, but some heads have rolled. It says, must be willing to work 7 days a week, 16 hours a day, it actually says.
Does it really? Does it really?
So they got some job security. It doesn't say what the pay is. I hope it's not $15 an hour, but yeah.
I gotta look. I mean, let me just talk about that for a second, right? So let's just go into psychosis and mindset. The tech guys are probably working around the clock. They probably look. I'm guessing in the early hours they knew where the problem was coming from right away. Now the problem is is the attack inside? Did somebody get inside that we don't know? It's not a virus. Again, according to the document that was released from the supposed hacker group, it's not a virus. This is somebody who logged into the system and gained utmost at root credential control on a single sign-on system that allowed them to run amok across all of the systems that were tied to it. And then the question is, how do they do that? We'll show that in a minute. But it doesn't surprise me on careers. It's kind of embarrassing. That's the weak point. You can enumerate what a company's problems are by looking at their job site. This is a pretty good, well-known. It's kind of what the YouTubers do. It's kind of what the tech guys do. But there's no question about it. I guarantee you've got consultants in here right now. You've probably got the vendors in here right now. They are probably in crisis mode. Having lived a life in this industry where I've had to deal with some tight operational stuff, there's no question about it. They've got all hands on deck. They're probably rolling into now multiple shifts. They're probably trying to get their folks sleeping. At least they would have done that in the first week. Everybody's in on board, pulling all-nighters, going through, tearing through, trying to understand. They're probably they would have gone into a Sev 1 type scenario where they have to triage. Somebody takes point on the triage. Somebody's messaging status. Somebody's probably handling legal. Right? There's going to be one person who owns the comms. Ultimately, it's going to take a minute when they get into this situation for how they message it up to leadership. But at now you're at a week and a half, right? So generally speaking, from a technology perspective, those teams are now identified one or more points of contact who own a very specific message. They probably got a specific message already in place. They probably know where the attack is. Now it's just root cause. How deep did it go? Where do we stand today? And how do we get out of it? They're building plans. But just something your viewers might not know is how the communication happens behind the scenes. At this point, your tech engineers, your product people, like the operations of facilities, they're all working with vendors, and you've got a team of people who are now triaging this with executives. More than likely, your executives are out there privately with the SEC, with Wall Street, with banks, analysts who could rank them down from hold to buy to sell positions. They are more than likely engaged with local law enforcement. I guarantee this has already gone up to the FBI and DOJ. It's going to automatically ask a question of, is this a terrorist attack? Is this a breach? You got to think, these are large banking institutions at the end of the day, right? And these systems that get in, as much as we like to think about it as entertainment, here's a fun fact. Go ahead and take $100,000 out of your account and wire it into the cage at, say, Bellagio or Aria, call it front money, and they'll hold that money for you as if it's a bank. You can go in at any point in 30 days and touch that money. If you don't get it in 30 days, they'll send you a check back out. These are large banking institutions that have billions of dollars. How they're communicating the message is a very controlled point at this point. In the early days, it would have been a chaos, I'm sure, but now it's probably streamlined. For the record, your viewers think I have a government cybersecurity background. Jim Wolf out there thinks that. I don't, but I have spent years in that space with people in that space. So yes. Yeah, so the interesting part about the document that the hackers release is they call out this thing they call it two things: Okta sync servers and Okta AD agents. I think they call them Active Directory agents. So sync servers it's a term that's not really used. So it kind of reeks of somebody who didn't quite have a handle on all the things. I'm going to guess that this is a person writing an article on behalf of the broader group. But let's talk about what a more mature, more legacy company like MGM is going to do. Take any of your longstanding institutions. So back in the day, single sign-on, when the internet started, when the internet kind of blows up in the mid 90s and we get to the bubble in the late 90s to 2000s. This is really the dawn of the internet. We have to go back to that point in time. And at that point in time, if you play back the history, we're not selling Macs. We're not selling tablets. We don't have the iPhone out until 2007. So what are these large enterprises doing? They're buying Windows laptops like crazy. You're talking Windows 95, Windows 98. Eventually, they start to move to Windows NT, 3.5, 3.5.1, 3.5.1, 4.0. And some people move to me, and we go through the whole Vista. But corporations and enterprises back in the 90s and eventually 2000s are buying large numbers of Windows machines. How large? Some of those large companies are buying hundreds of thousands of laptops. And one of the early challenges they get into is, and this has nothing to do with the attack, but it has everything to do with the attack. In those earliest of days, when they're buying Windows machines, the administrators 20, 30 years ago, are now asking questions like, hey, I need to share a file server with these 40,000 Windows machines that are in my office, or I need to restrict 20 of these. I need to be able to put a time zone on 20,000 of these with a policy, or I need to make sure I can get a file server shared to 30,000 in this group for HR. And there was no way to do this really easy about 30 years ago, when the Windows laptop comes out. And Microsoft addresses this with what they call Active Directory and Active Directory domains. And in the industry, this is lingua franca. This is where identity starts. And Active Directory is called AD, Alpha Delta for short, and it's called AD domain. So what are we talking about? We're talking about a logical concept where you can define users and groups and resources like file servers and print shares and policies and rules and conditions and a bunch of things. They call them group policy objects, or GPOs, technically speaking. But this is the rise of the Active Directory domain in about 98, 99, early 2000s, when the internet is just starting to turn. And it's solely used from the larger perspective in these enterprises to manage resources and provide a store, a database, if you will, for where to store usernames and passwords, credentials, what we would now call today the identity provider, IDP. So all of the enterprises race to that. And of course, as you'd expect, you've got tens of thousands of these machines in these companies. They're all tied. They're all what we call joined to Active Directory, the domain. You open your laptop, you sign in with your corporate email or corporate username, corporate password, and it logs you in. And that is where the industry starts in Active Directory. MGM has been around a long time. There's no question about this. I would almost guarantee that they started on Active Directory. And over the years, Active Directory was fine until mid to really late 2000s. We see the proliferation of services come online in the internet. We're talking DocuSign and Salesforce, eventually Slack. You've got Microsoft 365. These web-based tools are like, hey, I need to log in, and I need to log in, and I need to log in. These are well beyond what we were doing in corporate environments back in the 90s and 2000s. And in that era, everything we built was on the network that we had. There was really no external services at that point in time. That proliferation starts to happen in late 2000s. Todd McKinnon from Salesforce realizes this and leaves Salesforce and forms Okta in 2009. And over the years, companies are like, oh, okay, so the trend now is to leave Active Directory and move to single sign-on, right? So Active Directory is good at one thing. Three things. It's going to give you a username and password that you can sign your laptop into for your corporate resources. It's going to give you the ability to share other corporate resources like printers and file shares to those laptops. And it's going to give you rules that lock your machine down, right? What your time zone is, or what you can or can't do. And if any of your viewers are a little more technical in this space for Windows, they'll understand GPOs and registry edits. And that's what the domain does. But it has no concept at that point in time of how do I sign you into DocuSign on my behalf, and how do I sign you into Salesforce and these systems that these companies are really targeting. And so the rise of single sign-on comes in 2009, 2010, starts to get real traction about 2013, 2015. And now these companies are like, cool, we need to migrate into single sign-on. So the question that comes up, and this is the core of the entire attack here, according to that article, the question is, who owns the credentials? Who is the identity provider? You always have to have a single source of truth. You actually don't. But the question is, where does it live? And so let's talk just from an experience. MGM more than likely had Active Directory from the early years. And sounds like they've migrated or moved to single sign-on somewhere in time. We don't know exactly when that is, but I'm going to call it within the last 10 years. And you have to figure they got Bror, 50, 60,000 employees. And so
70
we're
as of this year.
70. Mm-hmm. Yep, there you go. So just for your viewers, MGM would start a migration project to Okta from Active Directory. This would be an Active Directory to Okta migration. By the way, what else could they have selected? They could have selected Microsoft Azure Active Directory, which just gets renamed last month, Entra ID, to the chagrin of its customers. Ping and Auth0 are some of the other big players out there. Okta buys Auth0, and they're still considered the largest. This migration probably happens when they start moving somewhere 10 years ago, but nonetheless, this is 70,000 employees. For your viewers here, this migration is going to take 3 years. It's not trivial. You have to change every system that you're logging in, all of these systems, the routers, your slot machines, potentially, your corporate resources, your external services. More than likely, these are backed by or tied into the Active Directory domain somehow. So you have to unpack that. So one of the really common tricks to avoid this is, hey, let's get single sign-on Okta to let you, Bror, you're going to go to mgmresorts.okta.com now. Not on your stream here, of course, but you're going to sign in as an employee. And we're going to find a way to go authenticate you back to the old Active Directory. So we don't have to remove your credentials just yet. We're going to leave Active Directory there for the time being and just use it as kind of a database or a store to do the authentication. And once we authenticate you, we're going to come back to Okta, and then we're going to let you go ahead and click through to Microsoft 365 or Miro or Salesforce or whatever system. And in this world, this is where MGM is, according to the document. If we zoom out just a bit more, Okta serves not as the IDP or the identity provider, but it serves as a bridge. So the experience is, in layman's terms, employees would go to the Okta portal. They would use their username and password, their corporate credentials. Okta would redirect that silently behind the scenes to their Active Directory servers that are still somewhere on their corporate network. They would say, yep, that's correct, or no, that's not. And assuming it was, then they would be returned, the request would be returned to Okta. And Okta would say, great, that's a valid request. I will go ahead and grant you a security token now that lets you get into any of these downstream systems. And we know this is the case because the article calls out this thing called Okta AD, or Active Directory agents and sync servers. And what are these? In a nutshell, when Okta sends a password request to Active Directory, it says, hey, my employee's logging in. I don't have their username password. You have it over here. They talk to Active Directory by way of that the MGM would have installed in Windows machines in that Active Directory domain. So what happens is, in the Active Directory domain, in that network somewhere in the building, for example, I mean, that's not where it is, probably a data center, but they have agent software running on Windows machines that are connected to Okta. And when you log into Okta, they're coming back and saying, hey, I'm going to broker this request to Active Directory. Can you take this to Active Directory and get it to log in? And Active Directory is going to say, yes, you're good, or no, you're not. And the attack happens, according to the hacker document. If you want to zoom in, the attack happens at Active Directory. So this is what I'm sure they're focused on. So what they talk about is dumping hash passwords and the Active Directory server. So what are we talking about? These agents have to run on Windows machines that are next to the Active Directory domain. They have root level permissions, administrator level permissions on the domain. That's technically what we would call it. And they handle these requests that are going to come in encrypted, and they have to effectively take them in. They might decrypt them, but they have to take them into Active Directory on behalf of Okta and say, hey, I've got a request here. Is this good or bad? And then Active Directory says yes. So the attack point, according to and this is the key, the attack point, according to the attacker's article, is in this agent or in these agents that is at Active Directory. How do they do it? Well, that's the $64 million question. If that's true, if it's all true, what that article says, $64 million question is, how do they get on the Windows machines where these Active Directories agents were that had administrative privileges into the domain? I just want to be very clear. These are not systems that you would just see in a kiosk or in an ATM or in some public facing world. These are well firewalled, well networked, well partitioned historically systems that are hard to get to. So there's one of two ways that you get into that. Potentially a third, but we won't go there. One is somebody on the inside did the job or opened the door for somebody on the outside, and they had administrative levels to this. Or two, somebody compromised the network in which the Active Directory domain was on, which would be in this case the corporate network, and that's a different problem. So either is viable here. If it's not an inside job, then somebody got into the corporate network and got to that server, but that's a really hard road to get to unless your security team hasn't set this up properly. But this is where security people are going to think that this is an inside job, and they're going to think that it's happening at this. The breach happens at the Active Directory agent. It's close to the domain. And what we're talking about now is, once the breach occurs, if this is the breach point, then theoretically, conceptually, and it sounds like in practice, they were able to ultimately get the hash passwords and take those into decrypted state. So every single MGM employee that's logging in to their front door to get into any of their email or whatever, these requests are coming back to Active Directory, and they're just sitting there watching them up in the air saying, yep, cool, Bror at brorfredrik.com or whatever your email address is. Hey, Bror Fredrik at. And they're watching your username and password in clear text at the end of the day. And so they slurp that out. So how do you get it out? That's a totally different problem. Again, highlights the potential for insider. You slurp that out, and then now you've got the username password to come back in the front door. And at that point, the article states that they've got super administrator rights into Okta. Well, one of those username passwords that comes across is most likely or can be associated to some type of administrators who are coming into the system just to do their day job, who are also super administrators or root level users. Okta calls them super administrators in the Okta system. And at that point, your bad guys are now able to log in as if they were not only employees, but super users. And the problem now you've got, and this is where the problem really goes, is now they can masquerade as anybody, right? They got into the country. Now they're free to roam, and I'm not being political here. I'm just saying, that's the challenge. As soon as somebody can come in, they can take over an account, they can lock the password out, right? So we can discuss if you want what they're probably going to do about it, but I think probably more interesting is what your viewers can do about it. But at that point, they're in the system, they're super administrators, they've got full control, full access to every system, regardless of the networks. And it's a very tough thing to walk out. You end up having to, in this type of situation, you start draining the house out, or you start burning your house down, or start cutting arms off, tourniqueting them, or just cutting them off. Like, you're taking critical systems and you're starting to take them offline, and you're starting to drain out the users that are on there, and you're starting to rebuild from ground up. And this is most likely where they are at today.
Now, based on that, the level of access they have through Active Directory and Okta, how vulnerable is the customer, the guest? Caesar's already come out and said that driver's license were compromised, credit card information was compromised, even social security information was compromised. So basically, they have the whole package. What about MGM? Can that information be compromised at this point?
You have to believe it could be. Yes, it's reasonable to expect that. And that's how we would talk as security people, is it's a reasonable expectation for that. If in fact they got into the single sign-on systems with root level administrator access, they could log into any system. They could here's the worst, they could log into emails. They could log into the email system and send emails off purporting to be the CEO, right? That's part of your challenge too. They're now in there, they're masquerading. You don't know who's real and who's not. If you're at the identity attack, then there's no question. They absolutely they're on the doorstep of the databases where that information is. Generally speaking, you pray that these companies are storing them in encrypted format. But then the question is, where's the material? What we call the material. Where's the encrypted, where's the credentials, the private keys, the sensitive material, where's that stored? Because if you can grab that, you can easily decrypt it. So I think any information in those databases where, if a hacker has access or is on the doorstep of those systems and has eventually root level access or can get into those systems, you have to expect that you're compromised. So, let's break it down, right? Okay, so some good advice, right? Your driver's license, that's the first to go. What's on there? Your birth date. Okay, that creates a pretty big attack point. But a lot of people are pretty open about that on social media now. They don't think about obfuscating that. On my driver's license, it's not my real address. It's a virtual address. There's plenty of services out there that offer you virtual mail addresses. That helps cut down on a lot of spam. The driver's license is one. The credit card is another. The easiest thing to do is just roll your credit cards. You should be, if you're not rolling your credit cards at least once a year, like, what do I mean by roll? Get a new one. Then you should be. And you should also be using virtual credit cards on, say, like your iPhones here, right? Your Apple Wallet, your Google Pay. So that's a pretty straightforward thing. I think it's reasonable for anybody to expect that they're going to be compromised. You can't wait for I certainly don't wait for the government to spoon feed me what they want to tell me, regardless of the party in office. You have to be proactive and you have to be vigilant. You have to look at your credit card statements. You have to expect your driver's license was there. It's a good time to investigate virtual private mail addresses, physical addresses. They do exist. Virtual mail addresses, just Google it. I would also recommend, the bigger issue is going to be the social security numbers. And so I think you said on streams hand pay. That's the idea that you're not printed a receipt on a slot machine, but something that says cash payout, and you print that receipt and you show it to somebody, and they then take your social for tax purposes, right? The other thing for table players is the Title 31, and this is the one that scares table players the most. When you're at a table, if your viewers don't know this, if you move back and forth in either direction more than 10,000 in physical cash, and I'm not talking in front money or marker money, I'm talking actual cash, real dollars, in any 24-hour period, the casino will stop your play. They will literally stop your play. The floor will come out and talk to you, and the floor will say, hey, you've now reached your 24-hour limit on 10,000 or more. If you want to continue to gamble in our casino, you have to sign a Title 31, and at that point, you have to relinquish your name and a bunch of information, including your social. Not uncommon. A lot of players will do that. If you don't, they will simply exit you from the property, and if you return within that 24-hour, they will trespass you with a misdemeanor. You don't want that because you risk being banned from that property. Title 31s are probably where they're getting hit the most, and I think the whales, what Vegas would call the whales, the big players, that's where, what the extent is, I don't know. I think the slot players are probably far greater in number, but, from a social security perspective, again, I think you have to be vigilant on your credit reports, right? You have to, AVG, I'm joking here, right? But you hear people talk about LifeLock. The reason they talk about LifeLock is because those are insurance policies effectively that do monitor your credit reports for changes, because it's hard in our day and age. We're all very busy. So change your credit cards right away. If you think you're affected, think about, what it means for do people care about your house address? Possibly. There's other ways to get that. Unfortunately, it's public information. If you rent and it's not public, then you're a little more exposed, and your social for sure. But this is the modern day we're in. And I'm not excusing this at all. I mean, this is a pretty egregious attack if what the hacker said. I mean, this should raise alarms, and they're trying to keep it hush because we're Vegas, right? So, that's my recommendation for your viewers is to check your cards. And keep in mind too, one of the big risks, and just two other things I want to add, Bror, before I forget. I know we're probably up on 50 or so minutes. We don't know what ends. We don't know if it's ended. We don't know if it ends. Caesar said they paid, but I don't know. Did you see the receipt? So there's a lot of PR and damage control happening here too behind the scenes that we just don't have visibility to. You got to expect that Caesars could come out and say we paid 15 million, so that people just say, okay, cool, that problem is done. Soundbite over, and then they'll deal with it for the next 18 months. There's also a world where you have to ask, what do the hackers really want? Is it money? Could be. Sometimes they want to prove a point. Sometimes they actually want a job. So like what color hat are they wearing? Are they the white hats? Are they the black hats? And sometimes it's a bit of a flex to say, we got you, pay us, and we'll be your bodyguards, we'll be your protective services for the next 3 years. We'll help you defend against the other attacks, and we'll kind of be your people. We don't know what that is. But the bigger issue is we also don't know if they're still in the systems, especially the MGM, and they could be for some time. And that's probably where the negotiations are. Like, hey, uncle, we give up. We know you guys are probably going to be in here. You need money, you need a job. We'll hire you for the next 3 years, for hundreds of millions of dollars to protect us. And at that point, they are wearing white hats. They're not black hats anymore. They got what they want. We don't know. But I would say this, going forward in the casino, is it safe to play? Well, all eyes are on them. The federal government's got to be in here. I don't have direct evidence. I'm not connected to the DOJ in that way, or the FBI or any of the agencies that would be involved, because they're going to look at this as a domestic and an external terrorist attack as well. You got to believe that those people are involved. So if they felt like the operation wasn't safe going forward, I would expect that they would shut it down or not let that. That's why you're probably seeing some slow stuff come back up, like room and reservations aren't there yet because they're not done with those systems, or I've heard slots aren't there yet. So those are the areas. So I think the damage is done. What do you do about it? And then what do you want to do going forward? But let's be clear, this is Vegas, right? Again, not excusing the behavior, but there's a lot of things that happen in Vegas.
Yeah, which you touched on one of my questions, which is, well, it's twofold. Is it really over, being one, and does paying them make them go away? I don't see that as feasible. They're just going to abandon that just for a couple dollars. As a side note, Caesars already announced that they're going to give a 1 year subscription of LifeLock to all their customers, which is, they must have cut a nice deal because that's expensive. And there's also reports coming out from people who have credit cards on file at MGM that their credit cards are being hit for a penny, for $50 from Temu, from gaming sites, from offshore sites. And then it's reversed right away. It's not even the credit cards doing that. And that might be a pressure that they're applying to MGM, saying we could really cause you a problem here should we want to, because those reports are out there that people's cards are being hit for very nominal amounts. So I would say that MGM has to follow suit and do a LifeLock as well. But again, you touched on it. Is it really over? They came out with a press release and an X. We have to call them X's now, not Twitters. That, guess what, everyone? It's all over. But it's not. It's obviously not.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not sure we'll ever find out.
Right.
I think Vegas has history about 5 or 6 years ago, incidents in hotels that are 35 or 36 floors up that have happened, where we're not sure what the final story was. And I'm not sure we care. And I'm not sure the public generally, it's hot in the zeitgeist for the moment. But like in the end, I'm not sure we have enough attention span, myself included, to be vocally critical here. I would say this. Here's what I would offer up for the broader viewership. There are some things you can protect, and some things that are characteristics of you are tied to you, or related to you, or describe things like your credit card. You are not your license, and you are not your credit card number, and you are not your social. Those are ways to get things about you, but you can put safeguards in place or monitor. You have to be proactive. You have to contain. And you have to monitor. Any security expert will tell you you cannot eliminate that attack. You could go to the grocery store. We've seen retail shops like Target years ago get compromised. I am not condoning the behavior, nor do I accept it. I'm not that person. I'm vigilant against that, right? This gets punished with the full extent of the law. That said, what I would encourage your viewers to do, the Bror Nation, is focus on the things that can identify you. Do you really need to give out your personal identifiable information, PII. If you're not familiar with this is PII is. There's three. PII is defined by 3 or more pieces of information that help get you to somebody. And a first name, last name is 1, a face could be 2, an email address could be 3, a phone number could be 4, any combination of information. Credit card doesn't get me to there, right? Address, yes, it does, right? Get a virtual address, right? That's an option. Be proactive about it. What are they about? $100 a month. That's very expensive. I think there's probably much cheaper plans out there. I don't know. I'm not current in that space. I work more in the enterprise space for that stuff. But really ask yourself the question: do I need to give all of my information out? Can I get under 3 pieces of information? Bror, you and I talk about this all the time offline. We talk about, in the day and era of the rising attacks of these systems that we don't have control of. We use them because they do things for us. They're convenient. Everybody wants, and just for your viewers, everybody wants your identity information. Why? Because it turns out identity is a massive business. And this might actually be ultimately the hacker's DAC.
It's a commodity.
Identity it's a hot commodity. And I would just recommend companies like Okta is an identity company. Certainly Microsoft is, Apple and Google are, by way of Face ID and all of the information they have on you. Everyone out there wants your information because it sells. And it not only does it sell, but it's valued a lot in Wall Street. And if you take a look at the market caps for some big identity players, Clear at the airport, their market cap is billions of dollars, right? We don't know exactly how many they have today, but we're talking, these are billions of dollars, multi-billion, we're talking 10 figure sometimes. Yeah, 10 figure at least, right? 10 billion or more industries. So start thinking about, my recommendation to your viewers is start thinking about how much do you really need to give that person your phone number? Like, do they really need to call you? I try to live a life. I'm not great at it, I'll be honest, but it's what security folks are going to say is limit how much you're giving out. If you can. Social security is going to be what it is. You can always change your social. And you can always change your address.
Most people don't know that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. You can totally do all that. So it's what you want to avoid. And the final thing, I know we're coming up on your hour here. Thank you for the time today. But what you want to avoid is things that let people get to you directly. the YouTubers talk about being doxxed, and that's when they can get touched directly, and that's like the greatest fear of a YouTuber, right? So for your viewers, if you're an MGM player or Caesars player, congratulations, you've just been doxxed too. And now
Mhm.
now the viewers understand what the YouTubers are thinking about, and that's probably where I would leave it.
I'm going to show something real quick that came up in all places in Facebook memories. I haven't been on Facebook other than the Bror Nation group in years, but I picked up on this and I think I posted it. I think it told me 5 years ago. I want everyone to check this out real quick. Fortunately, I can't flash it up on the screen. I'm going to show it on my phone. Is everyone getting a whiff of that? That's a social engineering hack, in case you did not know.
And Bror, let me offer this up too. I know we've gone long here, but security questions are the stupidest. Security questions are the dumbest thing ever. It's security by obfuscation. My recommendation as well for everybody is don't write your passwords down clearly. This attack does not affect your passwords. But what can you learn from this? Password managers, password vaults are your best friend. LastPass.com, which is owned by GoToMe, they got bought. OnePass. I know Google has pass. They're now being built into the browsers. If you're a browser-only user, a computer user, or a technology user, that's totally fine. You have to ask yourself, do I trust that these people have this stored? Personally, I'm a LastPass user. I've been a LastPass user for well over a decade. I know the internets and the neckbeards have things to say about LastPass, but it has stood the test of time. They've had their own issues and their own breaches internally too, and they're very public about that last year, and they got compromised. But there's still things that mitigate them even getting your passwords. Password vaults, and then when they ask you your security questions, my favorite is like, "What's your mom's maiden name?"
Oh, geez.
Sorry. Yeah, what it is? Frankenstein. It's not really
Right.
Frankenstein, right? So just security by obfuscation here actually works to some degree, right? What street did you grow up on? I don't remember. I mean, I do, but in my later years, I won't, right? So my recommendation is create artificial answers to these questions, document that, and then store that information in your password vault. Again, this has nothing to do with the hack, but if you're curious about where security people are thinking, we're thinking about how can I actually call you? How can I actually show up at your door? How can I actually touch you? How can I find out? It's crazy. The social side, I learned something about somebody a week and a half ago, but just the name and where they were from and some of their history and their career. It's amazing how easy we can connect those dots now. So just expect if you work from the position that independent of what the MGM says, you were compromised. What are you going to do about it? Get up, do it. Don't wait for somebody to tell you to do it. Be proactive. You'll be fine.
Yeah. Don't wait for your subscription to become available.
Don't wait for AVG on the slot machines. But there's lots exactly.
I mean, personally, myself, I don't even use my real signature on 99.9% of things. Walmart shows up at the door, I make an X. I mean, I do that with anything that's not a legal document. I don't even want my signature out in the world.
Nope. No, yeah, you got to think about
no point to it.
You got it's like we're having just a regular conversation, my friend.
Mm-hmm.
You public persona, if you're a YouTuber or not, viewers, you also have a public persona. And Bror's speaking the truth here. Just don't. Why does it's crazy. They don't need to see your real signature. They don't. And also stop talking about your birthday on Facebook and stop talking about, be mindful of the photographs that can come back to you, or at least set expirations on them, right? Retention policies are a good thing in our life, right? There's a reason that expirations are pretty good. Anyway, I know we're going a little out, but I would say this. I feel for the folks at MGM. I feel for the folks at Caesar. And there was a question, I think, by DRFTLA or the other casino safe. Don't know, right? Look, the funny thing is Win and the Win core could be compromised. I'm not suggesting they are. I don't have any knowledge that they are. They haven't been public about it. Again, walk in as if they're not safe and ask yourself the question, cool. Are you putting a credit card number? Look, there's a couple things you can do, and just for your players. If you don't know this, the easiest thing to do is wire money into the casino. Even if you're going to gamble $100, don't touch. Look, back in my youth, I would go to the strip clubs, right? Women and men do this, right? Men go to women, whatever it is, whatever the sexes and genders are. But I can tell you this, Bror, 30 years ago, when I was doing that as a kid, I wasn't putting my card down on an ATM at the strip club. And if you go into Vegas with the same mindset, even if you're going in for $100 or $500, work in cash. Cash is your best friend at the casino. If you don't feel comfortable carrying cash from the bank to the casino, wire it in. If you didn't know that, how this works, go to the cashier. Just go up and say, "Hi, I'd like the wiring instruction form, please." They will hand you a one sheet. It'll say casino name and the corporation. It'll say the details of their bank. You will then go to your bank and you will wire it in. They'll take all denominations. If you wire $5 in or 5 million, it doesn't matter. And when you wire it in, and wires do cost money, so I realize they have an expense and they're not convenient. They do take some time. And there's a period in which they close at like 5 Eastern every day, and they only work Monday through Friday. But think about that. If you're going to go to Vegas, if you really want a pro tip for how to do Vegas, wire your money in advance. They call this front money before you go out to Vegas on a trip. Okay. Wire it in, go to the cage where the casino is and say, "Hey, I've got a wire on hand." You will present them your information. They will look you up. They will say, "Yep, we see an inbound wire for $1,000. They will ask you, "How would you like it, in chips or cash?" And then take your chips. Always take chips. Never take cash. Never take cash from the cashier to the table. Take chips, because chips go in pocket and people are watching. I promise you, in the physical security world, we know that people are watching. And then go to the table that way. And when you're done, if you don't know this, when you're done, if you're up, keep some cash on hand, spend it at the bar, right? You're going to ask, "What do we do about our hotel room?" Okay, different credit card than the one that pays the house bills and the boat bills and the light bills and the electric bills, as the ladies' man said in the movie. House bill, for all those who know that movie. Use a different credit card at the hotel. If you can. I realize people might only have one or have zero. But if you have a second one that's not used for it, use something that's going into a dirtier environment, something that you expect to get compromised. And then finally, when you're done playing your session, if you don't feel like taking that cash back, you say, "How can I get this back into my bank?" Well, they're not going to wire it back in for you unless you're a very large player. Go in and say, "I'd like a check for this." And if you didn't know that, you can go back to the cashier and you can ask for, you can say, you can present them with all your money. Let's say you start with 1,000, you win 5,000. Hey, take $1,000, 500, have some fun money in your pocket. Ask them for a check back. They will issue you a check. And there's two things you can do. You can take that check, put it in your pocket, and get home. Or for the more closer to I'm not going to say degenerates, but like the true gamblers who
Degens, it's acceptable.
Yeah, I'm just watching the YouTube filters here.
Mm-hmm.
You can also have them FedEx it out for you too. And that's a real pro move. So why would you do this? Well, I just won a lot of money. I just won $50,000. I don't trust myself. The one property about getting a check is if I take a check for 50 grand, you think, okay, good. Keep in mind, I can go to that cage 2 hours later or 2 minutes later and say, "Can I get this for chips?" It'll take them a minute to process. They're not going to be terribly happy with you, but don't worry. It is a legally binding document that they have written for you, and they are obliged to honor it as well, just as if you were the bank. So if you didn't know it, you can take a check back. And so, like, if you start with 1,000, you win 50 grand, and you're like, "I don't know what to do with these chips. I can't take these as cash. Somebody's going to rob me somewhere. What do I do?" Go back to the cage, present your chips, and ask for a check. And you don't have to get a check in the whole amount. You can say, "Can I have 45,000 in a check, please, and 5,000 cash," or 45,000 in a check, 2,500 in cash, and 2,500 in chips, just so I can play around for the rest of the week. And if you don't trust yourself with the check, then just say, "Would you mind FedExing it as well?" Some casinos will do this, and some will say the FedEx is down the way. Bellagio, the FedEx, if you don't know it, is out past the Hermes and those stores up in the
Mm-hmm.
conference area. There's a FedEx open all day, every day, Monday through Sunday, and then do that too. So again, walk into the casino like it's not safe. It's inherently not safe. I mean, it's safe, but there's predators there, and I'm not going to go preachy. I don't think we should be scared. We just need to be realistic, and how you approach the casino is really the key.
Agreed.
And I see it looks like your viewers are already knowing about the mail the check back home. Yes. For the
Oh,
record.
how about that?
That's the right
Hey,
one.
I got a pretty well informed audience, and now they're even more informed. Steve, I do appreciate your time. I appreciate your knowledge, and I do appreciate your friendship. And I'll see you in a couple days.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it. Thanks for letting me be a guest on your show. And to the Bror Nation, thank you for listening.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.